The first time I saw him, something inside me shattered. Not in a painful way. No more like a crack in glass. Silent, but permanent. He wasn't even looking at me. He was standing there, hands behind his back, staring at a painting with a kind of focus I hadn't seen in years. My husband used to look at me like that. Before routine replaced curiosity. Before silence became safer than conversation. Before I stopped being a person and became a function. He turned slightly, and our eyes met. Not dramatically. No sparks. Just a glance that lasted a second longer than it should have. That second stretched like an elastic thread. It tugged at something I had long buried. A longing. A question. Maybe even guilt. I walked past him that night. Didn't say a word. But for hours afterward, I thought about that glance. That expression. That subtle recognition of sadness. I went back the next day. I told myself it was for the art. I wore perfume I hadn't touched in months. He was there again. Different shirt. Same intensity. He remembered me. This time he spoke. "You were here yesterday," he said. Not a question. A statement. His voice wasn't deep or smooth, it was real. Raw. Human. It scratched something under my skin. We started talking. Small talk at first. Books. Music. Silence. Our silences were strangely comfortable. We would walk through the gallery saying nothing, but somehow understanding everything. He never asked about my ring. I never offered an explanation. I wasn't ready to speak my truth out loud. Speaking it would make it real. And so it began. Slowly. Like a soft drizzle turning into rain. A coffee. A touch on the arm. A laugh that lasted too long. A glance that lingered too deep. We never planned it. But one day it happened. The kiss. That trembling, terrifying, breathless kiss that screamed everything we didn't say. I felt alive. And that's what terrified me. I started lying. Slipping out for yoga or book club. My husband never noticed. Or maybe he did and just didn't care anymore. I looked for signs of jealousy in him, signs of love, of ownership, but there was nothing. Just silence. He would ask if I wanted anything from the store, if I had fed the dog, if I paid the bills, but never, "Are you happy?" Never. "Where were you last night?" Guilt became my second skin, but so did desire. The two danced together inside Mione, choking, the other burning. And every time I said I was working late, I was really wrapped in another man's arms, pretending I didn't exist outside that moment. Then I made a mistake. A photo. Just our hands, barely touching, under the soft yellow light of a cafe. My phone, face down on the table, lit up. My husband saw it. Didn't say a word, just looked. Then he handed me the phone and walked away. That silence screamed louder than any accusation. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. He stayed in the guest room. The next morning, the kitchen was cleaner than usual. He had made coffee for himself. Days passed. We spoke only through necessities. I tried to explain once he shook his head. "Don't," he said. "It'll make it worse." The other man waited. He texted. Called. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He represented something I no longer had the right to want freedom. Weeks went by. I watched my husband become a ghost in our home. Still breathing, still existing, but gone. I wanted to scream, to beg, to erase everything. But I didn't. I let it rot in silence. One night, I found him standing in the kitchen holding the photo. The same one. He looked at me and said, "That's not what broke us." I asked what did. He said, "You stopped being here long before he came." I cried. Not because of the pain I caused, but because of the truth I'd been avoiding. I had left my marriage in pieces before I ever met the man who made me feel again. The betrayal wasn't the kiss it, was the silence that came years before. I don't speak to the other man anymore. I don't know if he's moved on. I don't know if he thinks of me. I sometimes wish I had never met him. Other times, I thank the universe for letting me feel something real, even if only for a moment. My husband and I still live together. We eat dinner, we wash dishes, we exist. But the love we buried that in the silence. And now, if you're reading this and wondering if you should take that step, ask yourself, are you looking for someone else? Or are you just trying to find yourself again? Because sometimes, the deepest betrayal isn't of another persona, it's of the version of yourself you promised to protect. And I broke that promise. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder when exactly I disappeared. Not from others, but from myself. There wasn't a single moment. No dramatic goodbye. It was gradual. Like a slow leak in a boat you didn't realize you were on until you started sinking. He made me forget the script. That's what scared me the most. He looked at me and saw something no one had seen in years. Not a wife, not a worker, not a hostess or homemaker, but a woman. A flawed, complicated, craving human being. And God, how I missed being seen like that. One time, we lay on his floor in the dark, just listening to each other breathe. He told me about the time his father left. I told him about the last time my husband kissed me like he meant it. We didn't need advice. We needed each other's presence. But time is cruel. It doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't stop just because you're happy. The more I tried to hold on to him, the more the real world pulled at me. Groceries, bills, emails, guilt. Guilt was always the loudest. He started asking questions. Are you happy? What are we doing? Are you going to leave him? And I didn't have answers. Only fear. Then one day, I stopped replying. I watched my phone buzz and eventually fall silent. He didn't chase me. He let me go. I stayed. With the man who stopped seeing me and the woman I stopped being. Now, I live in this in-between. I'm not with him, but I'm not really with my husband either. I keep a photo of yous in that cafe. His hand over my knee, a drawer I never open, but never throw away. If this story feels familiar, maybe it's because it's yours too. Or maybe it's one you're trying not to write. Either way, know this. Love can save you, but it can also destroy you if it's built on silence and fear. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again, but I know now that losing yourself in someone is never love. Love is what brings you back to yourself, not what makes you vanish. And I vanished. This isn't an apology, and it's not a confession either, it's just a release. Of all the things I've carried, secrets, guilt, memories, versions of myself that I couldn't hold on to, this story was the heaviest. I don't know what comes next. I don't have answers. I only know that I needed to say this, to admit it, to name it. Because silence can't be the end of every broken love story. Someone has to speak, even if no one listens. So this is me, speaking. Not to be forgiven, not to be loved again, but just to be real. And for the first time, in a very long time, I finally am. But even after speaking, something still remained. A quiet ache, a few memories I never got to tell. Sometimes, when the house is still and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator, I find myself remembering who I was before all of this. Before marriage, before the affair, before the silence. There was a version of me that wanted to write children's books, that danced barefoot in the living room, that wore bright lipstick just because it made her feel bold. She used to write letters to herself, fold them neatly, hide them in books and coat pockets like time capsules. One said, "If you ever forget who you are, come back here." I found one the other day, in a copy of The Little Prince. I sat on the floor and cried like someone had died. Because someone had. I wasn't always afraid to speak, but somewhere along the way, I learned that silence was safer, less risky than honesty, less messy than truth. And maybe that's why I stayed married long after the marriage had faded. Because the script was familiar. Because staying seemed less terrifying than starting over. I remember a day 5 years into our marriage, when we drove past a park I used to visit as a child. I said, "I used to love the swings there." He nodded. Didn't even glance over. I looked out the window the rest of the ride. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't betrayal. But it was the beginning of vanishing. People think betrayal is always loud, but most of the time, it's a whisper. It's a forgotten question. An unopened door. A look that doesn't land. I saw a therapist once. Just once. She asked me, "What are you hoping to find here?" I said, "My voice." She smiled. "Then start by telling me when you lost it." But I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because it hurt too much to say it out loud. We sat in silence. And for once, it wasn't comforting. A few nights ago, I stood in the kitchen. The lights were off. He came in, opened the fridge. Didn't notice me at first. When he did, I said softly, "Do you think I'm a bad person?" He didn't look at me, just poured himself a glass of water and said, "No, I think you're a person who was never allowed to be one." And then he walked out. That night, I dreamed I was back in college, painting, alone, covered in acrylics and music and laughter. In the dream, I looked so alive. When I woke up, my hands were clenched so tightly I had to pry them open. When people say, "You found yourself," they think it's clean, like a movie montage of confidence and healing. But sometimes, finding yourself looks like picking up shattered pieces and realizing half of them don't fit anymore. Sometimes it means letting go of who you tried so hard to be just to make room for who you really are. I wish I could say I'm okay now, that I moved on, that I found peace. But the truth is, I'm still learning how to live with the parts of me I low stand, the parts I gained that I don't quite trust yet. I'm learning that love isn't what saves you, it's what sees you. And I'm learning that seeing yourself, that's the hardest part. I haven't seen him, the other man, in over a year. But sometimes, when I walk past a bookstore or hear Nina Simone, I wonder if he thinks of me, not in a romantic way, just as someone who once needed him to feel real. And I hope he knows I was grateful, even if I vanished again. I'm not looking for closure. I'm looking for truth, even if it hurts, even if no one claps at the end of the story. Because not all stories end in redemption. Some just end. And maybe that's okay. So this is the part I leave behind. Not to erase, not to forget, but to forgive myself for being human. Because the only thing heavier than guilt is silence. And I've carried that long enough.